Welcome to Marketing Optimization with Alex Designs. I'm your host, Alex Harris, and today we're talking with Brendan Regan. How you doing, Brendan?
I'm doing well, Alex. Good to see you.
Now that we're in the new year, I love to talk about, we've been through Black Friday, we've been through the holiday rush. Let's talk about focusing on redoing your site and coming up with different hypotheses that you can come up with to make your site a lot better. To get started, I like to ask, what is your definition of optimization and why is it beneficial?
When I think about optimization, Alex, I tend to think of it in terms of efficiency. So you have a website which is sort of your hub, and you have a whole marketing system built around it, and you're making inputs into that system all the time. You're making investments, whether that's building new content for SEO or doing testing or designing new pages. Those are all inputs and investments you're making. And the efficiency of your marketing system is really about how many people are you getting to take the actions you want to take, and that's your output. So ultimately, efficiency, if you think about a machine, is about getting more outputs with the same or less inputs. If you think about fuel efficiency and things like that. So for me, optimization is increasing the efficiency of your marketing system. Oftentimes that, for me, is focused on the website.
As you're creating this efficiency, let's talk about how you plan to set up tests and help sites. And you talk a lot about setting up a hypothesis. What is a hypothesis in the context of A/B testing?
Sure. Well, first of all, a hypothesis, as we all know from middle school science class, it's the predicted outcome of an experiment. So then to take that into sort of a digital marketing context, a hypothesis really, in my mind, is your best educated guess about how you're going to try and fix a problem on your website. So you may have a landing page that you're looking at, and you're taking different pieces of data. You're saying, I think this page presents a certain challenge or challenges that's preventing people from taking the action I want them to take. And you will have some ideas about how to essentially overcome that challenge or fix that problem. Your best guess about what will fix that problem is essentially a hypothesis. And then you use an experimentation framework, of course, to prove or disprove that.
So this part I see is essential in your perspective. But really, why bother even coming up with a hypothesis?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to do, especially when you're first getting started with testing. And also, if you think about the various testing tools out there, they don't force you to come up with a hypothesis. You can just start plugging in different colors and different fonts and different buttons and images, and you can just start testing. But having a hypothesis to take your testing skills kind of to that next level, it's really about rigor and discipline. And there's a couple of reasons I think why hypotheses are really crucial and why I've really sort of focused on getting better at them over time and why I rely on them a lot in my work. First of all, you want to make sure your test results are conclusive, right? You want the data that you get out of your testing tool at the end of an experiment to be black and white. Data has a funny way of putting a lot of gray out there. So it can be very confusing at times when you're starting to get a lot of noise in the data as to, was this experiment really a success or not? Your hypothesis is that linchpin that can help you achieve that. Also, I think hypotheses are really important in terms of being aligned with your stakeholders, whether it's your clients or your bosses or whomever. You have stakeholders when it comes to testing and optimization. To make sure everyone's aligned in that testing project, the hypothesis, again, is that central point where everyone can be on the same page and say, this is what we believe will happen, this is how we will measure success, and we're going to prove or disprove it, one way or the other. And then I sort of alluded to this earlier, but really getting a level of rigor and discipline into your testing is, again, that way to sort of go from just getting started in testing and getting some results and some good and some bad, to taking it to that next level where you're consistently getting wins for your company or your clients over time.
Let's talk about that a little bit further, because it can be super high level, but let's really break it down. You have a great blog post specifically about this, talking about the 5 ingredients to a world-class hypothesis, specifically for marketing automation, optimization. Let's talk about those 5 ingredients.
Sure. I just sort of come up with this over time as a framework for thinking about how to write good hypotheses and really kind of how to go from a decent passable hypothesis to maybe a great or a world-class hypothesis. So if you're looking for ways to sort of set yourself apart in your optimization work, this might be something that you might be able to use to write better hypotheses and get better results more consistently. So there's basically 5 ingredients to what I consider a world-class testing hypothesis for digital marketing. And these are in no particular order or priority. One is quantitative data. So this one's pretty popular because we all use our web analytics platform to get reports about a page and look at, what's the bounce rate of this page and what's the time on page and how well does this page convert compared to others. So we're swimming in quantitative data. So obviously that's a great place to go looking for inputs into your hypothesis. Another one, though, is qualitative data. So this is not tables and rows and numbers. This is really feedback from surveys. This is, listening in on your call center or talking to your customer service or sales reps or listening on social media. All of that stuff counts as qualitative data. And that's another great input to finding maybe what's wrong with a page or, understanding people aren't really getting your value proposition and you need to work on that, for example. Then we have what's called heuristic analysis or heuristic data. And heuristic really means rule of thumb. So if you've been doing testing for a long time or you read a lot of blogs or you watch marketingoptimization.tv, you have some good rules of thumb to say, hey, generally speaking, across various verticals, this tends to work. So that's another input to sort of say, okay, landing pages generally should be simple and shouldn't have a lot of extraneous navigation. That's a great rule of thumb to sort of put into your testing. It won't always work for you, but it's a place to start. Then, of course, another input that I think is often overlooked is stakeholders. So again, in any testing project, you have stakeholders, whether they're line of business managers or marketing VPs or CMOs or your boss or your client or whomever it is. You obviously have people who have a stake in the test and in the outcome and in trying to solve these problems that optimization solves. So you need to get their input before you really finalize your hypothesis. 2 reasons for this. One is you want to make sure they're engaged and involved and on board with what you're doing. And then secondly, the stakeholders often have insights that you just don't have. You're looking at the design of the page or the layout or the copy or something like that. But a stakeholder might know something like, we tried this 5 years ago in a campaign and it tanked. Or, we've done a bunch of research in focus groups and we heard this. So those are really important inputs to bring into your hypothesis forming as well. And then last but not least is what I call intuition. Intuition's a funny one because as data-driven marketers, we tend to sort of be moving away from intuition. We don't want to do what's called gut marketing. So we want to use data and testing and things like that to sort of prove our results and be data-driven. That's great. But there's still a place for intuition. At the end of the day, when you're looking at a test page, there's still room for you to say, my gut says that this image is distracting, and if we remove it, we'll see some lift. So I believe that's an equally important input into kind of the recipe of a great hypothesis.
That was an excellent breakdown, and I want to give people a real understanding of some practical ways that they can really use this. So I want to take you through walking through some examples of creative that we've done that I work for a client, and in this new year we're promoting this energy drink. So you that are listening, I'm going to take you through this landing page, 2 different landing pages that we'll be talking about, and obviously if you're checking out on video, you can see it. So this particular client sells health and fitness supplements. We're optimizing their site for the new year. So let's talk about why and how would you create a hypothesis for these 2 pages? Okay.
So the first one I'm looking at, I just want to make sure we're on the same page, is the picture of the bottle in the upper left.
Perfect.
Okay. So So let's go through and let's sort of, obviously we won't have all of these inputs because we haven't been working together on this particular design and we don't have access right now to, stakeholders, but let's kind of go through a mock exercise of sort of getting those inputs in place, and then we'll form a hypothesis. So the first one I mentioned was quantitative. So obviously this client has some web analytics running on the page, and so theoretically we'd be able to log into their system and have a look at what's going on with this page. So what would be some things in the quantitative realm that you might look at for as inputs?
As far as how many people clicked on a certain button or maybe filled out a form, the bounce rates, the traffic that arrived there, basically any number that you can dig through Google Analytics, I would assume.
Right, exactly. So you might have click-through rates or time on page. Bounce rate's a good one. So let's just say, for the sake, hypothetically, that we're looking at the report for this page, and the bounce rate is 79%. So that would be an example of a quantitative input that says, hey, that bounce rate of 79% is a little on the high side, and that's an input into our hypothesis that there's something about this page that is off-putting in some way, shape, or form, right? So then let's take the qualitative. So an example here might be maybe when you were in your initial design stages of this, maybe you did some wireframes, and maybe you put those wireframes in front of 3 to 5 sort of random people, and you got some feedback, right? So what types of feedback have you heard in the past that was sort of qualitative in terms of page design?
Absolutely. And if you see in the bottom left corner, I use this example specifically because we have a SurveyMonkey running where we are collecting survey data, as far as demographic information, influence and triggers of buying, where they're buying from, what part of the country. If they're in Colorado or California, they're more likely more active versus, other parts of the country, those type of things.
So let's say, for the sake of, again, hypothetically, you got some feedback, qualitative feedback from the survey that said, I'm concerned about the ingredients of this supplement. I want to make sure they're all coming from a quality source. I want to make sure the ingredients are all from the USA. They're all sort of lab tested and things like that. Does that seem like a reasonable piece of qualitative feedback?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially with the craze of organic and everything else, people are very influenced by the ingredients. Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll say hypothetically that was sort of something we latched onto in terms of qualitative.
Great.
Then we've got heuristic. Again, this is sort of the rule of thumb thing. And let's just take one, for example. There's sort of this banner at the top of the page, pre-fuel, pre-workout energy drink. And there's a kind of lifestyle image, and then there's some italicized font, and then there's a sort of color bleed across it. So let's just say heuristic, believe that the lifestyle imagery is distracting from the headline. So the headline, it's important to know when you hit this page that it's a pre-workout energy drink, correct?
Right.
So because of sort of the F pattern of scanning and things of that nature, we'll just say heuristically that might be a challenge. We don't know that, but it might be a challenge. So we've got that as our heuristic. And then stakeholders, I obviously haven't met the stakeholders, but when they have you working on redesigning the page, what types of feedback do you sometimes get from your stakeholders?
The consistent thing you'll find in clients is branding, going off brand with stuff. The stakeholders have a lot of equity in certain headlines or trademarks that they really want to follow. So, getting outside of some of the best practices of really the core brand is probably what stakeholders care about the most, I guess. Obviously, they want more numbers, but they want to keep the creative at the highest level.
Absolutely. Another thing I sometimes hear when I first start working with clients is they sort of sense that there's this disconnect between, let's say, they have a series of banner ad creative out there running on other sites, and then they have this landing page. and maybe the creative was done at two different times by two different agencies, or one's older or one's newer. So there's sometimes kind of that visual disconnect where maybe this landing page is really on brand, but the marketing out there in the wild is maybe less on brand. So maybe let's just say the client says, the stakeholder says, I feel like there's a disconnect that may be hurting the performance of the page.
That's a great way to summarize it.
And then lastly, we have intuition. And, looking at the page,
so as far as intuition being that you don't really have to think about what they're offering, and the clarity is so visual that it's intuitive.
Yeah, you want to make sure it's intuitive, and if something about the page doesn't make you feel like it's intuitive, or you get a sort of a gut reaction that something is not really working the way you want it to, then this is the time to surface that sort of thing. So an example here might be this area of the price where it says price $34.99 with the knockout text in the blue background. I don't know about this dark background with the knockout text.
Right. Yeah, the visual hierarchy may be a little bit confusing. There might be a little bit too many colors going on. That might create friction. So, yeah, those are some obvious design changes that I have seen, that there's a lot of stuff going on. And as we've added more stuff, it's become a little bit more busy.
Sure. So let's just review. So for quantitative, we have, a high bounce rate, essentially. For qualitative, we've heard a concern about the quality of the ingredients that go into this sort of mixture, this compound. Heuristic, we've thought that there may be a challenge with the lifestyle imagery being a distraction from the product name and the headline. Then from stakeholders, we heard, maybe this page is on brand, but maybe the advertising isn't as on brand, and maybe there's a visual disconnect from, clicking on a banner ad that's all green and landing on a page that's blue and orange, for example.
Right.
And then our intuition says something about this pricing area with the dark background doesn't quite feel right, maybe based on past tests or just gut. So we now have a bunch of inputs. We've got 5 really powerful inputs into our hypothesis. So by looking at the page, I imagine that our sort of success, our conversion point is, at a minimum, we want people to add this particular product to their cart. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that would be the first step in the goal.
So, we can sort of get into whether you would measure to the top of the funnel or the bottom of the funnel, or what sort of your KPIs are, but let's just say, for the sake of this discussion, we want to get more people to add this product to the cart.
Okay.
All right. So now we've got these inputs which are sort of talking about challenges, and we've got our success metric, and now we need to think about what might we do to solve some of these problems. Now, the tricky part here is we have a bunch of different inputs, and we may not be able to solve all of these challenges in one test.
Right. So
sometimes you have to prioritize. Let's say, for example, we decide we don't want to deal with the banner at the top. We're going to focus on the surfacing information about ingredient quality and doing a different treatment of the pricing area. So we're going to take basically 2 challenges to address in our first round of tests. And in later rounds of tests, we'll have to deal with some of these other things. Make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So now we've got sort of the 2 challenges, which is the price treatment and, sort of a lack of understanding or prominence of information about ingredient quality. So how would we go about solving those 2 things?
We can do testing for the copy, working the ingredients into above the fold copy, and then obviously a different price treatment area for the add to cart.
Right. So for example, I see there's a link here that says view ingredients. which then opens a new window, which gives me tons of information about the ingredients. So that's really good. That sort of brings transparency and alleviates some of that anxiety. So maybe what we do is we do an ingredient summary. Instead of making people click on a link, we just show a little box with sort of an ingredient summary. So that's how we're going to try and overcome the challenge that we heard in our qualitative feedback. And then on the pricing area, you're the designer of the two of us, so what would you maybe do to try and overcome the challenge that we sort of had in our gut about maybe people aren't picking up on the price, maybe it's scary, whatever the challenge might be.
Yeah, let's click over to the next example, and you actually can see some of the things that I actually tried to do as I created some of the ideas that I had when I created my hypothesis. So,
Gotcha.
so in this case, I pulled out the add to cart area and made it pop out by using background colors and just made it a little bit cleaner. And people were getting confused by the prices. Order 6 versus the regular discount price. So I think there's a lot of confusion between the copy there. So really breaking out those sections was really what I was trying to do. In this new example.
Perfect. So now we've basically got our two solutions, right? We've got two things we're going to try to overcome those two challenges, and we'll do an A/B split test. And so I think we're ready to talk through our hypothesis. So basically, we know that the add to cart conversion rate is what we're going to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there's these two challenges, and we're going to make basically two changes. One is an ingredient summary on the page, and the other is basically taking your treatment of the add to cart box and doing something like that on this page, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we can say that showing an ingredient summary below the product image and redesigning the add to cart area, including the pricing display or treatment, will increase the add to cart conversion rate by a statistically significant amount.
Right.
Whatever you decide on or what your tool defaults to, usually industry standard will say we're aiming for 95% confidence that version B is better than version A, right?
Absolutely.
So now we've got our hypothesis. I think it's world class because we've taken all our inputs. We haven't tried to boil the ocean and solve everything at once, but we've picked a few things we think we can solve for, and we've made it very black and white. Essentially, at the end of this experiment, you're going to have two add to cart conversion rates, one for A and one for B. If A's is higher than B's, we've disproven that hypothesis. And it's back to the drawing board, but that's okay. If B is higher than A, we've proven that hypothesis, that showing ingredient summary and a new pricing add to cart box treatment will outperform the control in terms of the add to cart conversion rate. Not easy, but completely doable. Like, you can do this. Everybody out there listening can do this.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy because you have to really have thick skin to get through it because you're going to probably have a lot of fails. In this case, even, testing these two different pages, I think we changed too much on the actual test and not really narrowed it down to a specific element and testing that element one by one to really figure out how to get to more of a bigger change because we were testing too many things at one time and we had really no direction in this case. But I'm going to test this stuff and I'm going to report back on the findings that I learned because I've already had so many ideas about stuff that I could test already today. So I'm definitely going to report back on this stuff.
Yeah, and you mentioned something I think that's really important, which is, this isn't easy work to go through the rigor of taking all these inputs and synthesizing all of them into, a really strong hypothesis. But now's a good time to really talk about the benefits of kind of why it's worth all that hard work. And there were a couple of things come to mind for me that I've sort of discovered through my years of writing, not so good hypotheses and running not so good tests and learning from those mistakes. So the first benefit or what might be kind of in it for people if they take on this framework and really go to this level of discipline is that your testing efforts are going to be perceived much better when you have a really strong hypothesis at the beginning, middle, and end of your test, because you need it at the beginning to get everyone on the same page, and at the end you need it to make sure that you have those black and white, very conclusive results. So if you're in the habit of writing really strong hypotheses and presenting them to your stakeholders, their perception of you as an optimizer and of testing in general is going to be much higher. Secondly, it's for your own clarity and peace of mind as well. It can be very frustrating when you run an experiment. You sort of alluded to this, where you run an experiment and the results aren't really discernible. They're not black and white. You don't have that sort of feeling of, we set out to do this thing and we did it, cleanliness. So you really will gain some peace of mind if you put in the effort up front of doing a strong hypothesis, because then at the end, when you're looking at your results, you'll refer back to that really strong hypothesis and it'll be black and white. And just having that sort of conclusiveness is a great feeling. And then finally, you talked about brand alignment and stakeholders and kind of what stakeholders care about. Sometimes you're going to run tests where the results are essentially unpopular. In other words, you might test a sacred cow, an image that the CEO likes, or a video that the brand manager thinks is the bomb. So you might run a test where those things fail. And it's very tough to present results where that sacred cow actually underperforms and is proven.
Yeah.
So that's when you go back to your hypothesis and you say, this is what we set out to prove or disprove. It's very black and white that the hypothesis was proven. That, it takes sort of ego and sort of politicalness out of the conversation, or it helps anyway.
I think by clearly identifying your hypothesis ahead of time, you're able to really create a map from where you want to go. That way you have a checklist of all the areas you really want to hit, and if you're able to break it down by each of those metrics that you discussed, it's definitely a clear map of a great way to get started with conversion rate optimization.
Yeah, and when you get into a testing rhythm, you have sort of an ongoing testing program. Certainly you're tracking the amount of lift you get in your tests and how that might tie to revenue. But one of the things we encourage our clients to do is to sort of keep a record of all those hypotheses and whether they were proven or disproven, because essentially that forms over time. If you have really strong hypotheses and you run really sort of clean tests to prove or disprove, over time you're going to have a very powerful body of research about your website, where you've tested these different ideas on these different pages, and you've got black or white results on whether it was proven or disproven over time in different places. Ultimately, it's a great resource for digital marketers in general. Whether they're going to do testing or not, it's great to be able to refer back to and say, we tested getting more visibility into the ingredients on this page. Well, maybe on our email campaign, we need to do the same thing. Or maybe in our product packaging, we need to make an adjustment to that. So, keeping track of those hypotheses and the yeses or nos can be, again, sort of a very powerful body of knowledge for a whole company.
I think you made a really great point there, because once you do find out what actually does win, and it can be hard to actually get things to actually win, do more of that. You can take those same wins and apply them to your email campaign, your banner display campaigns, your social media campaigns. That's a really great takeaway. And I don't think enough people do that, because as soon as you find something that's really winning, do more of that.
Test more of that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The funny part is that you can take a winning approach, you can roll it out to other channels or other pages, and it may lose in a test.
Yeah. Well, Brendan, I really appreciate you coming on the show. You gave some really great education on creating a hypothesis. Let's conclude by telling people how they can find out more about you.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. And it was really great to finally get this done. I know we've been sort of planning it for a while, and I'm really glad we got to do this. I really like what you're doing. For people out there watching, I've actually worked with Alex on using his designs in my tests, and I think so far we have a perfect record together. So Alex definitely knows his stuff, and I'm really excited about what he's doing with these podcasts. In terms of keeping up with me, You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. I'm Brendan Regan, easy to find. Also, I have a blog about marketing optimization, and that's at brendan-regan.com.
Thanks, Brendan. Have a good day.
Thanks, Alex. Cheers.